Okay, let's go on to part 12, commentary on the 11th chapter of Isaiah. In Isaiah chapter 11 verses 1 to 10, it is said, "And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. And all shall make him of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord. And he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears. But with righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins. The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together. And a little child shall lead them, and the cow and the bear shall feed, their young ones shall lie down together. And the lion shall eat straw like the ox, and the suckling child shall play on the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the cockatrice's den. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea." This rod out of the stem of Jesse might be correctly applied to Christ. For Joseph was of the descendants of Jesse, the father of David. But as Christ found existence through the Spirit of God, he called himself the Son of God. If he had not done so, this description would refer to him. Besides this, the events which he indicated as coming to pass in the days of that rod, if interpreted symbolically, were in part fulfilled in the day of Christ, but not all. And if not interpreted, then decidedly none of the signs happened. For example, the leopard and the lamb, the lion and the calf, the child and the asp, are metaphors and symbols for various nations, peoples, antagonistic sects, and hostile races, who are as opposite and inimical as the wolf and the lamb. Let's have a look what that means. Inimical. Tending to obstruct or harm, hostile, and unfriendly. Who are as opposite and hostile and unfriendly, or inimical, as the wolf and the lamb. We say that by the breath of the Spirit of Christ, they found concord and harmony. They were vivified, and they associated together. Okay, so two parts to what just got told there. One is saying that you could say that this rod from the stem of Jesse was Jesus, yet Jesus was born of the Spirit. So he wasn't from that directly through DNA. Yet he also fulfilled some of what's said in there because he is the Son of God. So a part of that can be looked at as him, yet it's only half fulfilled. And we all know that the Bible talks about the return of Christ, so I'm sure that's what we're going to go on to see. Meaning he needed to return to fulfill all the signs. "But they shall not hurt nor destroy in my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea." These conditions did not prevail in the time of the manifestation of Christ. For until today, various and antagonistic nations exist in the world. Very few acknowledge the God of Israel, and the greater number are without the knowledge of God. In the same way, universal peace did not come into existence in the time of Christ. That is to say, between the antagonistic and hostile nations, there was neither peace nor concord. Disputes and disagreements did not cease, and reconciliation and sincerity did not appear. So even at this day, among the Christian sects and nations themselves, enmity, hatred, and the most violent hostility are met with. Yeah, so continuing on off what was said there, where it's not all fulfilled, and even though Christ did bring his message, even the Christian sects and nations are at war with each other. So all of these lion and the calf and child and the asp, all those metaphors that are representing nations and different sects and different parts of collective centers in the world. Obviously, we're still waiting for the return out of that. But these verses apply word for word to Bahá'u'lláh. Likewise, in this marvelous cycle, the earth will be transformed, and the world of humanity arrayed in tranquility and beauty. Disputes, quarrels, and murders will be replaced by peace, truth, and concord among the nations, peoples, races, and countries. Love and amity will appear. Cooperation and union will be established, and finally, war will be entirely suppressed. When the laws of the most holy book are enforced, contentions and disputes will find a final sentence of absolute justice before a general tribunal of nations and kingdoms, and the difficulties that appear will be solved. So the laws in the most holy book are the laws of the Kitab Yaqdas. So if I just go up here, right there, that's the most holy book, the book of law in the revelation of Bahá'u'lláh. So that sets all the precedents for making rulings in the future. And when that is the enforceable law in the world, then absolute justice for the nations and kingdoms will appear. The 5 continents of the world will form but one. The numerous nations will become one. The surface of the earth will become one land, and mankind will be a single community. The relations between the countries, the mingling, union, and friendship of the peoples and communities will reach to such a degree that the human race will be like one family and kindred. The light of heavenly love will shine, and the darkness of enmity and hatred will be dispelled from the world. Universal peace will raise its tent in the center of the earth, and the blessed tree of life will grow and spread to such an extent that it will overshadow the east and the west. Strong and weak, rich and poor, antagonistic sects and hostile nations, which are like the wolf and the lamb, the leopard and the kid, the lion and the calf, will act toward each other with the most complete love, friendship, justice, and equity. The world will be filled with science, with the knowledge of the reality of the mysteries of beings, and with the knowledge of God. Now consider, in this great century, which is the cycle of Bahá'u'lláh, what progress science and knowledge have made. How many secrets of existence have been discovered? How many great inventions have been brought to light and are day by day multiplying in number? Before long, material science and learning, as well as the knowledge of God, will make such progress and will show forth such wonders that the beholders will be amazed. Then the mysteries of this verse in Isaiah, "For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord," will be completely evident. Reflect also that in the short time since Bahá'u'lláh has appeared, people from all countries, nations, and races have entered under the shadow of this cause, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, Buddhists, Hindus, and Persians all associate together with the greatest friendship and love, as if indeed these people had been related and connected together, they and theirs for 1,000 years. For they are like father and child, mother and daughter, sister and brother. This is one of the meanings of the companionship of the wolf and the lamb, the leopard and the kid, and the lion and the calf. Yeah, okay, so just saying, like, in this modern day, that many Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, Buddhists, Hindus, Persians have all come together as friends under the shadow of the Bahá'í Faith. One of the great events which is to occur during the day of the manifestation of that incomparable branch, Bahá'u'lláh, is the hoisting of the standard of God among all nations. By this is meant that all nations and kindreds will be gathered together under the shadow of this divine banner, which is no other than the lordly branch itself, and will become a single nation. Religious and sectarian antagonism, the hostility of races and peoples, and differences among nations will be eliminated. All men will adhere to one religion, will have one common faith, will be blended into one race, and become a single people. All will dwell in one common fatherland, which is the planet itself. Universal peace and concord will be realized between all the nations, and that incomparable branch will gather together all Israel, signifying that in this cycle Israel will be gathered in the Holy Land, and that the Jewish people who are scattered to the east and west, south and north, will be assembled together. Now see, these events did not take place in the Christian cycle, for the nations did not come under the one standard which is the divine branch. But in this cycle of the Lord of hosts, all the nations and people will enter under the shadow of this flag. In the same way, Israel scattered all over the world was not reassembled in the Holy Land in the Christian cycle. But in the beginning of the cycle of Bahá'u'lláh, this divine promise, as is clearly stated in all the books of the prophets, has begun to manifest itself. You can see that from all the parts of the world, tribes of Jews are coming to the Holy Land. They live in villages and lands which they make their own, and day by day they are increasing to such an extent that all Palestine will become their home. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was written some time ago, and we've seen Israel form as an actual nation since this was written. If we go Wikipedia on 1904 to 1906. So this book was written well before even the Balfour Declaration was created, which was when Israel was signed. There was a declaration signed for the creation of Israel. So there you go. Let's look at the next chapter. (13) Commentary on the 12th chapter of the Revelation of St. John. We have before explained that what is most frequently meant by the holy city, the Jerusalem of God, which is mentioned in the Holy Book, is the law of God. It is compared sometimes to a bride, and sometimes to Jerusalem, and again to the new heaven and earth. So in chapter 21, verse 1, 2, and 3 of the Revelation of St. John, it is said, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven, saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God. Notice how clear and evident it is that the first heaven and earth signify the former law. For it is said that the first heaven and earth have passed away, and there is no more sea. That is to say, that the earth is the place of judgment, and on this earth of judgment there is no sea, meaning that the teachings and the law of God will entirely spread over the earth, and all men will enter the cause of God, and the earth will be completely inhabited by believers. Therefore, there will be no more sea, for the dwelling place and abode of a man is the dry land. In other words, at the epoch, the field of that law will become the pleasure ground of man. Such earth is solid, the feet do not slip upon it. Yeah, so I think about the story of Noah's Ark when I read that as well, talking about the earth, that there'll be no more sea. There is no sea. So, you know, for millennia we've had these arks of salvation, Noah's Ark being an example, the Ark of the Covenant. So these covenants work as a, basically we're going into God's ship. It's like Admiralty law, but under God. But in this new cycle, the whole earth, there will be no more sea, basically sea of evil, I guess, or sea of, you know, the chaos and turmoil that's always been called evil. So the whole world is going to become a dwelling place, an abode of man that's dry land. So the sea will be taken away. Okay, I mean, that's just some extra idea of mine, but the law of God is also described as a holy city, the New Jerusalem. It is evident that the New Jerusalem which descends from heaven is not a city of stone, mortar, bricks, earth and wood. It is the law of God which descends from heaven, and is called new. For it is clear that the Jerusalem, which is of stone and earth, does not descend from heaven, and that it is not renewed, but that which is renewed is the law of God. Yeah. So remembering that we read before in one of the earlier chapters that there's two parts to God's law. So the New Jerusalem is the physical laws on how the, you know, in the Kitabi Akdas, in that book that we talked about before in the Most Holy Book. And then you have the spiritual laws that are never change. So the love and compassion and the spiritual side of it. The law of God is also compared to an adorned bride who appears with most beautiful ornaments, as it has been said in chapter 21 of the Revelation of St. John. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And in chapter 12, verse 1, it is said, And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. This woman is that bride, the law of God that descended upon Muhammad, the sun with which she was clothed, and the moon which was under her feet, and the two nations which are under the shadow of that law, the Persian and the Ottoman kingdoms. For the emblem of Persia is the sun, and that of the Ottoman Empire is the crescent moon. Thus, the sun and moon are the emblems of two kingdoms, which are under the power of the law of God. Afterward it is said, Upon her head is a crown of 12 stars. These 12 stars are the 12 Imams, who were the promoters of the law of Muhammad and the educators of the people, shining like stars in the heaven of guidance. Then it is said in the second verse, And she being with child cried, meaning that this law fell into the greatest difficulties and endured great troubles and afflictions, until a perfect offspring was produced. That is the coming manifestation, the promised one, who is the perfect offspring, and who was reared in the bosom of his law, of this law, which is as its mother. The child who is referred to is the Bab, the primal point, who is in truth born from the law of Muhammad, that is to say, the holy reality, who is the child and outcome of the law of God. His mother, and who is promised by that religion, finds a reality in the kingdom of that law, but because of the despotism of the dragon, the child was carried up to God. After 1260 days, the dragon was destroyed, and the child of the law of God, the promised one, became manifest. Let's have a look at despotism. The exercise of absolute power, especially in a cruel and oppressive way. Yeah, so despotism is a part of the way that Islam has been forced upon people, right? Cruel, in a cruel way. There's a lack of in the administration. I'm not talking about all the individuals who find God through the Quran, but through the administration of the laws of, through Sharia law, etc. It's quite barbarous and cruel the way that these are put on people, rather than the choice of finding God and kindness and love, and bringing people about to wanting to turn from their sins, wanting to ask forgiveness, and they just enforce it and kill you if you don't. Not everybody, the hard administration of it. Okay, next one. Verses 3 and 4. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head. And his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them out to the earth. These signs are an allusion to the dynasty of the Umayyads, who dominated the Mohammedan religion. 7 heads and 7 crowns means 7 countries and dominions over which the Umayyads had power. They were the Roman dominion around Damascus, and the Persian, Arabian and Egyptian dominions, together with the dominion of Africa, that is to say, Tunis, Morocco and Algeria. The dominion of Andalusia, which is now Spain, and the dominion of the Turks of Transoxania. I guess that's the word, Transoxania. The Umayyads had power over all these countries. The 10 horns mean the names of the Umayyad rulers. That is, without repetition, there were 10 names of rulers, meaning 10 names of the commanders and chiefs. The first is, I'm going to wreck all these names. The first is Abu Sufyan, and the last Marwan, but several of them bear the same name. So there are 2 Muawiyah, 3 Yazid, 2 Walid, and 2 Marwan. But if the names were counted without repetition, there would be 10. The Umayyads, of whom the first was Abu Sufyan, Emir of Mecca, and chief of the dynasty of the Umayyads, and the last was Marwan, destroyed the 3rd part of the holy and saintly people of the lineage of Muhammad, who are like the stars of heaven. Yeah, sorry, so I'm probably going to butcher a lot of what I read in the rest of this verse, because I'm not a Farsi or Arabic speaker, but I'll continue. Verse 4. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour the child as soon as it was born. As we have before explained, this woman is the law of God, The dragon was standing near the woman to devour her child, and this child was promised manifestation, the offspring of the law of Muhammad. The Umayyads were always waiting to get possession of the promised one, who was to come from the line of Muhammad, to destroy and annihilate him. For they much feared the appearance of the promised manifestation, and they sought to kill any of Muhammad's descendants who might be highly esteemed. Verse 5. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. This great son is the promised manifestation, who was born of the law of God and reared in the bosom of the divine teachings. The iron rod is a symbol of power and might. It is not a sword, and means that with divine power and might, he will shepherd all the nations of the earth. This son is the Bab. Verse 5. And her child was caught up unto God, and to his throne. This is a prophecy of the Bab, who ascended to the heavenly realm, to the throne of God, and to the center of his kingdom. Consider how all this corresponds to what happened. Verse 6. And the woman fled into the wilderness. That is to say, the law of God fled to the wilderness, meaning the vast desert of Hejaz and the Arabian Peninsula. Verse 6. Where she had a place prepared of God. The Arabian Peninsula became the abode and dwelling place, and the center of the law of God. Verse 6. They that should feed her there 1,260 days. In the terminology of the Holy Book, these 1,260 days means the 1,260 years that the law of God was set up in the wilderness of Arabia. The great desert, from it, the promised one has come. After 1,260 years, that law will have no more influence, for the fruit of that tree will have appeared, and the result will have been produced. Consider how the prophecies correspond to one another. In the Apocalypse, the appearance of the promised one is appointed after 42 months, and Daniel expresses it as 3 times and a half, which is also 42 months, which are 1,260 days. In another passage of John's Revelation, it is clearly spoken of as 1,260 days. And in the Holy Book, it is said that each day signifies 1 year. Nothing could be clearer than this agreement of the prophecies with one another. The Bab appeared in the year 1260 of the Hijra of Muhammad, which is the beginning of the universal era reckoning of all Islam. There are no clearer proofs than this in the holy books for any manifestation. For him who is just, the agreement of the times indicated by the tongues of the great ones is the most conclusive proof. There's no other possible explanation of these prophecies. Blessed are the just souls who seek the truth, but failing justice, the people attack, dispute, and openly deny the evidence. Like the Pharisees, who at the manifestation of Christ denied with the greatest obstinacy the explanations of Christ and of his disciples. They obscured Christ's cause before the ignorant people, saying, "These prophecies are not of Jesus, but of the promised one who shall come later, according to the conditions mentioned in the Bible." Some of these conditions were that he must have a kingdom, be seated on the throne of David, enforce the law of the Bible, and manifest such justice that the wolf and the lamb shall gather at the same spring. And thus they prevented the people from knowing Christ. Note, in these last conversations, Abdu'l-Bahá wishes to reconcile in a new interpretation the apocalyptic prophecies of the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, rather than to show their supernatural character, on the powers of the prophets, the knowledge of the divine manifestations, visions and communications with spirits. Okay, so we saw there that although some of the parts of the prophecy did relate to the first coming of Christ, some of it relates to the second coming and the manifestation of the Bab, and even the coming of Muhammad, and then working from, what do they call it, the Hijra of Muhammad is where we need to take the 1260 from. So it's the year 1260 of that era. So we look at the Muhammadan calendar. In the previous chapters, it talked about that's the lunar calendar. Once you go from the Muhammadan era, the Hijra of Muhammad. Okay, back to contents. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, 14 spiritual proofs. In this material world, time has cycles. Places change through alternating seasons, and for souls there are progress, retrogression, and education. At one time it is the season of spring, at another it is the season of autumn, and again it is the season of summer or the season of winter. In the spring there are the clouds which send down the precious rain, the musk-scented breezes of life-giving zephyrs. Let's have a look at that word. Light wind, a west wind. Okay, the life-giving breezes. The air is perfectly temperate. The rain falls, the sun shines, the fecundating wind wafts the clouds. The world is renewed, and the breath of life appears in plants, in animals, and in men. Making fruitful. Okay, so fecundating, like fruiting. Maybe more growing and giving life, not just for fruit. Yeah, okay. Earthly beings pass from one condition to another. All things are clothed in new garments, and the black earth is covered with herbage. Mountains and plains are adorned with verdure. Trees bear leaves and blossoms. Gardens bring forth flowers and fragrant herbs. The world becomes another world, and it attains to a life-giving spirit. The earth was a lifeless body. It finds a new spirit, and produces endless beauty, grace, and freshness. Thus the spring is the cause of new life, and infuses a new spirit. Afterward comes the summer, when the heat increases and growth and development attain their greatest power. The energy of life in the vegetable kingdom reaches to the degree of perfection. The fruit appears, and the time of harvest ripens. A seed has become a sheaf, and the food is stored for winter. Afterward comes tumultuous autumn, when the unwholesome and sterile winds blow. It is the season of sickness, when all things are withered, and the balmy air is vitiated. The breezes of spring are changed to autumn winds. The fertile green trees have become withered and bare. Flowers and fragrant herbs fade away. The beautiful garden becomes a dust heap. Following this comes the season of winter, with cold and tempests. It snows, rains, hails, storms, thunders and lightens, freezes and congeals. All plants die and animals languish and are wretched. Okay, so that's a brief description of all the seasons. That's, yeah, probably, I'm sure there's other descriptions out there, but that I've never described the seasons that way. Although it's short, it's quite deep. When this state is reached, again a new life-giving spring returns. So that's the end of all the cycles. We started with spring. Okay, so when this state is reached, again a new life-giving spring returns, the cycle is renewed. The season of spring, with its hosts of freshness and beauty, spreads its tent on the plains and mountains with great pomp and magnificence. A second time, the form of the creatures is renewed, and the creation of beings begins afresh. Bodies grow and develop. The plains and wildernesses become green and fertile. Trees bring forth blossoms, and the spring of last year returns in the utmost fullness and glory. Such is, and such ought to be, the cycle and succession of existence. Such is the cycle and revolution of the material world. It is the same with the spiritual cycles of the prophets. That is to say, the day of the appearance of the holy manifestations is the spiritual springtime. It is the divine splendor. It is the heavenly bounty, the breeze of life, the rising of the sun of reality. Spirits are quickened, hearts are refreshed and invigorated, souls become good, existence is set in motion, human realities are gladdened, and grow and develop in good qualities and perfections. General progress is achieved, and the revival takes place. For it is the day of resurrection, the time of excitement and ferment, and the season of bliss, of joy, and of intense rapture. Okay, so the cycles of the prophets are like the cycles of the seasons. So they come, there's a springtime when they come. I'll read on through here. I'm sure Abdu'l-Bahá says it before I cap the whole thing. Afterward, the life-giving spring ends in fruitful summer. The word of God is exalted. The law of God is promulgated. All things reach perfection. The heavenly table is spread. The holy breezes perfume the east and the west. The teachings of God conquer the world. Men become educated. Praiseworthy results are produced. Universal progress appears in the world of humanity, and the divine bounties surround all things. The sun of reality rises from the horizon of the kingdom with the greatest power and heat. When it reaches the meridian, it will begin to decline and descend, and the spiritual summer will be followed by autumn, when growth and development are arrested. Breezes change into blighting winds, and the unwholesome season dissipates the beauty and freshness of the gardens, plains, and bowers. That is to say, attraction and goodwill do not remain. Divine qualities are changed. The radiance of hearts is diminished. The spirituality of souls is alerted. Virtues are replaced by vices, and holiness and purity disappear. Only the name of the religion of God remains, and the exoteric forms of the divine teachings. The foundations of the religion of God are destroyed and annihilated, and nothing but forms and customs exist. Divisions appear, firmness is changed into instability, and spirits become dead. Hearts languish, souls become inert, and winter arrives. That is to say, the coldness of ignorance envelops the world, and the darkness of human error prevails. After this come indifference, disobedience, inconsiderateness, indolence, baseness, animal instincts, and the coldness and insensibility of stones. It's like the season of winter when the terrestrial globe, deprived of the effect of the heat of the sun, becomes desolate and dreary. When the world of intelligence and thought has reached to this state, there remain only continual death and perpetual non-existence. Yeah, so I had a few thoughts while reading that there. First thing I was thinking about is, like, in the future, when the next manifestation of God comes, they're told that it's going to be 1,000 years from the coming of Bahá'u'lláh, and given a breakdown here of how the world is going to start looking. Like, there's this decline in spirituality, sort of an outward shell of existence, but it's going to be different because this is the kingdom of heaven that is like the foundation for the next 500,000 years. There'll be more manifestations, but it's a new cycle with a new system. So anyway, I was thinking about that, and then I was thinking about the spring that we're in at the moment in the world, where there's so much progress since the Bab declared and Bahá'u'lláh after. On the day the Bab declared was the day that the first telegram was sent saying, "What hath God wrought?" So, and since then we've had this explosion in the world of all sorts of things for humanity, not just spiritual but physical. So we're in this sort of springtime where things are coming together, and there's an upliftment, and souls are becoming, they're growing, and then I thought also about when Bahá'u'lláh did come and the state that Islam was in, or even when Jesus came, the state that Israel and the Jewish faith was in, where they're just these outward husks where people might be doing the physical laws, but the spirit is withered, and all those things happen, which, indifference and disobedience and inconsiderateness and all these things start happening. Anyway, next paragraph. When the season of winter has had its effect, again the spiritual springtime returns, and a new cycle appears. Spiritual breezes blow, the luminous dawn gleams, the divine clouds give rain, the rays of the sun of reality shine forth, and the contingent world attains unto a new life and is clad in a wonderful garment. All the signs and the gifts of the past springtime reappear, with perhaps even greater splendour in this new season. The spiritual cycles of the sun of reality are like the cycles of the material sun. They are always revolving and being renewed. The sun of reality, like the material sun, has numerous rising and dawning places. One day it rises from the zodiacal sign of Cancer, another day from the sign of Libra or Aquarius. Another time it is from the sign of Aries that it diffuses its rays. But the sun is one sun and one reality. The people of knowledge are lovers of the sun, and are not fascinated by the places of its rising and dawning. The people of perception are seekers of truth, and not of the places of its appearance, nor of its dawning points. Therefore they will adore the sun from whatever point in the zodiac it may appear, and they will seek the reality in every sanctified soul who manifest it. Such people always attain to the truth and are not veiled from the sun of the divine world. So the lover of the sun and the seeker of the light will always turn toward the sun, whether it shines from the sign of Aries, or gives its bounty from the sign of Cancer, or radiates from Gemini. But the ignorant and uninstructed are lovers of the signs of the zodiac, and enamored and fascinated by the rising places and not by the sun. When it was in the sign of Cancer, they turned toward it, though after the sun changed to the sign of Libra, as they were lovers of the sign, they turned toward it and attached themselves to it, and were deprived of the influences of the sun merely because it had changed its place. For example, once the sun of reality poured forth its rays from the sign of Abraham, and then it dawned from the sign of Moses, and illuminated the horizon. Afterward it rose with the greatest power and brilliancy from the sign of Christ. Those who were the seekers of reality worshipped that reality wherever they saw it, but those who were attached to Abraham were deprived of its influences when it shone upon Sinai and illuminated the reality of Moses. Those who held fast to Moses when the Sun of Reality shone from Christ with the utmost radiance and lordly splendor were also veiled, and so forth. Therefore, man must be the seeker after the reality, and he will find that reality in each of the sanctified souls. He must be fascinated and enraptured and attracted to the divine bounty. He must be like the butterfly, who is the lover of the light from whatever lamp it may shine, and like the nightingale, who is the lover of the rose in whatever garden it may grow. If the sun were to rise in the west, it would still be the sun. One must not withdraw from it on account of its rising place, nor consider the west to be always the place of sunset. In the same way, one must look for the heavenly bounties and seek for the divine aura. In every place where it appears, one must become its distracted lover. Consider that if the Jews had not kept turning to the horizon of Moses, and had only regarded the Sun of Reality, without any doubt, they would have recognized the sun in the dawning place of the reality of Christ, in the greatest divine splendor. But alas, 1,000 times alas, attaching themselves to the outward words of Moses, they were deprived of divine bounties and the lordly splendors. Yeah, I wonder if in the future, is this alluding to the possibility that there's going to be a divine educator from the west? So if the sun were to rise in the west, it would still be the sun. Could just be cryptically inserted there for people in the future, 1,000 years or something. This is also talking about just the manifestations, and if a manifestation comes from Iran, that's not a reason to say they're not a manifestation of God. Yep. So let's go on to the next. So part 15, true wealth. True wealth. The honor and exaltation of every existing being depends upon causes and circumstances. The excellency, the adornment, and the perfection of the earth is to be verdant and fertile through the bounty of the clouds of springtime. Plants grow, flowers and fragrant herbs spring up, fruit-bearing trees become full of blossoms and bring forth fresh and new fruit. Gardens become beautiful, and meadows adorned. Mountains, plains are clad in the green robe, and gardens, fields, villages, and cities are decorated. This is the prosperity of the mineral world. The height of exaltation and the perfection of the vegetable world is that a tree should grow on the bank of a stream of fresh water, that a gentle breeze should blow on it, that the warmth of the sun should shine on it, that a gardener should attend to its cultivation, and that day by day it should develop and yield fruit. But its real prosperity is to progress into the animal and human world, and replace that which has been exhausted in the bodies of animals and men. Yeah, okay, so vegetable, or the mineral world, was that up here? Mineral world, it gets to progress on to attaining a part of the vegetable world, and that's good for the minerals. And then the highest sort of perfection that the vegetable world can achieve if they're so lucky and graced is to become a part of me, or part of you, or part of animals. So they beg for us to eat them. Yep. The exaltation of the animal world is to possess perfect members, organs, and powers, and to have all its needs supplied. This is its chief glory, its honor and exaltation. So the supreme happiness of an animal is to have possession of a green and fertile meadow, perfectly pure flowing water, and a lovely verdant forest. If these things are provided for it, no greater prosperity can be imagined. For example, if a bird builds its nest in a green and fruitful forest, in a beautiful high place, upon a strong tree, and at the top of a lofty branch, and if it finds all its needs of seeds and water, this is perfect prosperity. But for real prosperity, for the animal consists in passing from the animal world to the human world. Like the microscopic beings that through the water and air enter into man are all assimilated and replace that which has been consumed in his body, this is the great honor and prosperity for the animal world. No great an honor can be conceived for it. So it's a high honor for me to eat the animals. It's sort of what they're there for. That doesn't mean we need to be cruel or anything to them. Yet it's the highest spiritual, for them it's the highest honor. Therefore it is evident and clear that this wealth, this comfort, and this material abundance form the complete prosperity of minerals, vegetables, and animals. No riches, wealth, comfort, or ease of the material world is equal to the wealth of the bird. All the areas of the plains and mountains are its dwelling, and all the seeds and harvests are its food and wealth, and all the lands, villages, meadows, pastures, forests, and wildernesses are its possession. Now, which is the richer, this bird or the most wealthy man? For no matter how many seeds it may take or bestow, its wealth does not decrease. Then it is clear that the honor and exaltation of man must be something more than material riches. Material comforts are only a branch. But the root of the exaltation of man is the good attributes and virtues which are the adornments of his reality. These are the divine appearances, the heavenly bounties, the sublime emotions, the love and knowledge of God, the universal wisdom, intellectual perception, scientific discoveries, justice, equality, truthfulness, benevolence, natural courage and innate fortitude, the respect for rights and the keeping of agreements and covenants, rectitude in all circumstances, serving the truth under all conditions, the sacrifice of one's life for the good of all people, kindness and esteem for all nations, obedience to the teachings of God, service in the divine kingdom, the guidance of the people, and the education of the nations and races. This is the prosperity of the human world. This is the exaltation of man in the world. This is eternal life and heavenly honor. Yeah, so it's saying, from what I gather, is, we can, if we just seek those material comforts, we're not much more useful than an animal, right? So it's not our true highest nature. Although it's comforting, there's a greater honor that we can fulfill in this world. So yeah, outside of just gathering wealth, serving those principles. These virtues do not appear from the reality of man except through the power of God and the divine teachings, for they need supernatural power for their manifestation. It may be that in the world of nature a trace of these perfections may appear, but they are unstable and ephemeral. They are like the rays of the sun upon the wall. As the compassionate God has placed such a wonderful crown upon the head of man, man should strive that its brilliant jewels may become visible in the world. Okay, so that's the end of part 1 on the influence of the prophets in the evolution of humanity. Next we'll move on to part 2, some Christian subjects.